Astonishing Legends Network.
Hey everybody, welcome to Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf second anniversary special, The Miracles Mega Mix. So this podcast premiered 2 years ago today, which means I've been working on it for almost 3 years, and I can tell you it is by far the best thing I've ever done. And when I say best thing, I mean it's the thing that I am most proud of, the thing that has been most fulfilling to me, and the thing that I've enjoyed doing the most. It is such a pleasure to create something that I can deliver directly to you guys with no interference from the outside. Only help. No interference, just help. What a dream for a television writer to do something with this level of creative freedom. The only way I've been able to do it is with you guys listening and supporting the show and telling your friends about the podcast. And that's more important now than ever. Let your friends know. If you can each just get one more person to listen, I'll be able to do this forever. And that would make me very happy. Once again, I want to thank my brilliant wife, Susan Lambert, for coming up with the idea for the podcast, and Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess for being such great friends, for having me on their show so many times and encouraging me from the very beginning to try doing this on my own. And of course, the ASSAP UK, you all know who you are and you know what you did and why you're all legends. I'm a very lucky guy. I couldn't have done it without all of them. And now with everyone who works on the show, episode in, episode out, I owe them all a debt of gratitude. My hope is to be celebrating these anniversaries with you guys for many, many years to come. So, to celebrate the second anniversary, we have a new item in our merch store, Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf Spiral Notebook Journals. These are spiral-bound, college-ruled, and with a really cool but rarely seen version of our logo on the cover. Now, this is a special limited supply offer. These are exactly the kind of journals I've been using for the last 25 years, and I thought this is the perfect item to have in the store. So go to richardhatemsparanormalbookshelf.com. In the upper right-hand corner, click on Shop Exclusive Merch, and take a look at everything we've got, but really take a look at these cool-ass limited supply spiral-bound notebook journals. Grab one while you can. I think you're going to love them. These are things you can actually use. Okay, on to the Miracles Mega Mix. So just to be clear, this is not a new episode. Rather, it's a convenient compilation of the Season 1 episodes, Miracles Part 1, 2, and 3. We've cut them all together. They're now all in one place for easy, convenient listening. Are you going on a road trip? Are you backpacking through Europe? Are you training for a marathon? Are you snowbound in a mountain cabin? Are you stranded on a deserted island? Now, with a click of a single button, you can hear the entire Miracles saga. Okay? So here's the deal. Throughout the next year, we're going to be doing this with all the two-part episodes we've ever done. We're going to drop them into the feed at various times in the new Megamix format so you can listen to the whole story in one sitting in one podcast. So that means, Communion and National Directory of Haunted Places and Siren Call of Hungry Ghosts, all the two-parters, you can now listen in one special easy to access place, okay? So, again, thank you guys so much for making this podcast a huge, huge success, beyond my wildest dreams. You are my light in the dark. So, without further ado, here we go, the Miracles Mega Mix. Here we go. Miracles by D. Scott Rogo. Miracle definition. an extraordinary event in the physical world that surpasses all known human powers and is ascribed to a supernatural cause. All book people know this to be true. Sometimes you find the book, sometimes the book finds you. Miracles by D. Scott Rogo, Dial Press, New York, 1982, found me by accident. I started collecting books in college, but things really took off in the late 90s because A, some of those sweet, sweet residuals from Under Siege 2 Dark Territory started to come in, and for the first time in my life, I had just a little extra money to spend, and B, the internet. The internet made book collecting easier and faster. Thanks to a site called addall.com, I was able to enter a title and immediately search thousands of used and antiquarian bookstores in seconds. That sounded like a commercial. Addall, if you like that, let me know. I can do more. Anyway, suddenly book buying was a breeze, but it was not without its risks. I had ordered a hard-to-find book called Phone Calls from the Dead by D. Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayless, and I'm telling you, it's even scarier than it sounds, and it'll get its own episode soon. The bookstore that had it was in Delaware, so there was no chance I would have ever just found the book while browsing. So this was huge. A book I'd been hunting for years was going to be in my mailbox in less than a week. Easy sleazy. This was late March 2001. On April 2nd, the universe played a late April Fool's Day joke, and the wrong book arrived. The book was Miracles. The subtitle of Miracles is, quote, a parascientific inquiry into wondrous phenomenon. And Rogo, I love you, but I don't think parascientific is a word. It's the kind of word designed to drive skeptics insane. It even bugged me. I felt like it made the book sound unserious, just when it was trying to sound serious. Plus, I had no interest in the subject matter. I just wasn't intrigued by the idea of people bleeding from the palms of their hands for no reason, or being healed by a statue in a grotto in France. In fact, I wasn't just not intrigued, I was actively annoyed. I was totally down with seeing strange things. I just hated the instant explanation, the obvious and predictable assigning of meaning, especially when it seemed designed to prop up organized religion. This was the realm of the true believer. This was as bad as a skeptic's instant instinctual dismissal of strange phenomenon. Both sides were rushing to an answer and skipping over the best part of any mystery, the question. Where was the wonder? As in, I wonder what this is. I wonder how it got here. I wonder what it means. Stand at the doorway of a question as long as you can before crossing over the threshold into an answer, because if it's a real mystery, your need to step into an answer will be guided by your conscious or unconscious beliefs. In other words, you'll end up with the answer you want, which may not be the answer that is correct. I called the bookstore in Delaware, only to find that the listing for Phone Calls from the Dead was a clerical hiccup. That book had been sold months ago and should no longer have been on the website. The book Miracles had been sent to me as the result of a second error, this one human, right author, wrong title. They told me to send it back for a full refund. I said I would, and then, like every other human being on Earth, I put off the chore and felt bad about it, and still did nothing, and continued to feel bad in a never-ending loop of self-castigation and laziness. Life went on. Life at that point was great. And terrible. The Mothman Prophecies was getting made, and my 9-year marriage was dissolving. I had a lot riding on Mothman. I was at a point where my individual career as a screenwriter was not yet established. The only credit I had was Under Siege 2 Dark Territory, and that was a shared credit with my friend Matt Reeves. Matt's career had moved forward. He had co-written and directed The Pallbearer, and then had co-created Felicity with his friend J.J. Abrams. During that time, I'd been hired to write movies, but none of them had been made. So Mothman, which was my own and felt incredibly personal, also made me feel incredibly vulnerable. If it did well financially and critically, it could change everything for me. It could establish me in a way screenwriters only dream about. And it would be a validation of me. It would be the thing that all writers and actors and musicians and painters and creative people of all stripes really pray for. Widespread public validation. Not just fame for fame's sake, but a kind of vast acceptance, a warm wave of humanity saying, we see you, and we get it, and we like it, and we like you. For some, it boils down to simple human connection, but for most, and for me, it was supposed to fill a hole left inside me from childhood. It only takes a handful of therapy sessions to understand where the soul pain is and what caused it. Mommy or daddy or both didn't love me correctly or enough. But it takes a lot longer to stop feeling that pain. It's a process of connecting to the child part of yourself that experienced the pain and trying to reassure that inner child that they're not going to die and that the adult version of you will always be there for them. The problem with this slow process is that it is slow, and in the meantime, your soul looks for shortcuts. My shortcut was become a famous, successful writer, and the love you feel from your fans will make everything okay. My other shortcut was marry someone that reminds you of your dynamic with your mother and relive a more successful version of your childhood with them. A sort of emotional do-over. Get it right the second time around. A love mulligan. By 2001, I was deep into both shortcuts. One was working, maybe. It all depended on how Mothman was accepted. The other wasn't. My wife was on her own journey, struggling with the echoes of her own childhood. I thought I could be instrumental in solving her problems for her. I thought I could be a savior to her in a way I couldn't for my own mom, who suffered from depression she never even knew she had and wouldn't have admitted to under any circumstance. You might think, Rich, it's not fair to your wife to base the success of a marriage on your ability to solve her life. And you'd be right, smartass. But I was white-knuckling my way through my own life, my own anxiety and self-loathing, and there's only so much you can know about yourself at any given time. But hey, I was in therapy, I was trying. For me, it was a process that was going to take years. The emerging truth was that the slow way is the fast way, and that there were no shortcuts. In 2001, I'd been going to therapy for 5 years and making a lot of progress. On the outside, I looked pretty much like I do now. A funny, happy, healthy guy pursuing his dreams like a motherfucker. But inside, I was on a very big, old, creaky roller coaster every minute of every day. I hid my fear and took my punches and swallowed my blood, kept making jokes, kept running in the direction of solutions I felt sure would save me. The biggest miracle was I never turned to booze or drugs for help. And the reason I didn't is because I was too afraid of losing control. I had to solve my world by sheer force of personal will. And for that, I had to be constantly vigilant at all times. I had to handle every person in my life just like I handled my mom, like wet dynamite, because my personal safety depended on it. And I couldn't do that if I was drunk or high. I was always on duty. I was always in control. It all depended on me. And now it all depended on Mothman. If it was a financial and critical success, not only would that fill me with the public love and validation I thought I needed to survive, it would also make me successful. And if I was successful, that meant I was saving both myself and my wife. Success, money, security. I'd save us both in one grand gesture. The scary part was that in reality, I had no control over any of it. I'd written the script, and I was pretty sure that what they shot was what I wrote, but I was never allowed on set. I never dealt with Mark Pellington, the director, or Richard Gere, or Laura Linney, or any of the other amazing actors and crew and craftspeople involved. in making what I still thought of exclusively as my movie. I had to hope and pray things worked out. I'd come a long way, but every step closer to the finish line was fraught with increasing danger. I might just pull it off, but I was going to need a miracle. Yeah, I know I keep saying miracle. I'll get back to the book soon enough. Now, meanwhile, I needed a job. I completed all drafts and paid rewrites for every assignment I'd had in the past 2 years, and now I had no income. The release of the Mothman prophecies was 9 months away, and even then I wouldn't see any money for at least 6 more months after that when the residuals would start coming through. Plus, in what would become a recurring issue in my career, a possible writer's strike was looming. So I was taking every single meeting I could get and pitching on everything, hoping I could line up some paid work before any possible work stoppage. In late April, my agent called about a feature film script in development at Spyglass Films. Would I be interested in doing a quick rewrite? At that point, I was interested in anything. I told him to send it immediately. I think it's your kind of thing, he said before hanging up. It's called Miracles. See, I told you I'd get to it. Now, I never connected the script to the book, and as it turns out, the script was not connected to the book. It was its own thing. And it was a wonderful thing. Written by Michael Petroni, it was a romantic drama character piece about a young man preparing to become a priest who is assigned to investigate miracles. His investigation takes him to Newfoundland, where a series of events have the locals convinced that their small fishing town has been blessed by God. The miracles in question seem to center around an eccentric young woman, and as our hero, Paul Callan, spends more and more time investigating her, the more unsure he becomes about his calling to become a priest. It was a magical, charming script that reminded me of Local Hero and left me totally confused as to why the producers wanted anyone to rewrite a single word of it. And as it turns out, they didn't. The script had become a passion project for Russell Crowe, who intended to star in it as well as direct it, but for reasons I was never too clear on, that deal fell through. But Spyglass had a first-look development deal with Touchstone, the studio that supplied television shows to Disney's ABC network. Spyglass wanted to get into the television business, and Touchstone was looking for something spooky. Fox's The X-Files was coming to an end, and those viewers would need somewhere to go for their shivers and chills. Spyglass and Touchstone had meetings about all of this, and they thought, well, what if we develop a show that is basically Vatican X-Files? What if we find a writer who could keep the idea of a young priest investigating miracles, but give it a touch of The Exorcist? What if the miracles this young priest investigates have nothing to do with God? What if they weren't miracles at all? This is why they sent me Miracles. Spyglass had read my Mothman prophecy script and were intrigued. Maybe this is the guy we're looking for. Now, I found all this out from my agent the night before the meeting. I didn't really have time to prepare a pitch, but I knew I needed something to convince them that I was, on a basic, undeniable level, the perfect guy to write this TV pilot. I decided to bring a book along, and I knew just which one. I walked straight into my office and grabbed The Physical Phenomenon of Mysticism by Herbert J. Thurston. You thought I was going to say Miracles by D. Scott Rogo, didn't you? That, my friends, would have been way too obvious. Also, I'd already forgotten I had it. That's right. 2 things called Miracles arrive in my mailbox in the span of 3 weeks, and I don't make the connection. I really deserve nothing good that has ever happened to me. The Physical Phenomenon of Mysticism, Burns Oates, London, 1952, is a readable but remote scholarly work by Father Herbert Thurston, an English priest of the Roman Catholic Church and a member of the Jesuit order. Thurston sounds like a cool guy. He was one of a vanishing breed, even in the early 1900s, a religious man who realized that to truly be devout was to accept that supernatural things may very well be happening all the time, and those things needed to be sorted into miracles or other. Other was a bit undefined, but the implication was, Satan. Thurston joined the Society for Psychical Research in 1919 and was the guy at the seances wearing the priest collar. He was skeptical of miraculous and purely physical phenomenon, but he didn't rule it out. What made me bring the book to the meeting at Disney was a quote of his that thematically jibed with the heart of the miracle screenplay. Here it is. It's about being an investigator of miracles for the church. Quote, "The role of devil's advocate is a thankless one and does not make for popularity. Indeed, I may confess that when writing, somewhat in the character of a doubting Thomas, I have felt at times, in spite of good intentions, that I was even playing a mean and unworthy part. Why, I have asked myself, should a skeptical line of argument be put forward which may possibly trouble the simple faith of many good people much nearer and dearer to God than I can ever hope to be?" Now, this was a delicious concept, and it played out in Michael Petroni's script. In the very first scene, his young priest in training, Paul Callan, is called to investigate the case of a nun that has been exhumed from her crypt after 100 years, but has experienced no decay. Everyone at the church is pretty excited. "We've got a miracle here. Just think, God loves us. Even better, we might finally get some money to spruce up the chapel." But Paul Callan takes a look around and in about 2 seconds reveals that this miracle is no miracle, and the incorruption of the nun's corpse has been caused by the pits of the rotting apricots that have fallen in the church graveyard. The apricot pits have released a gas into the soil that preserves the bodies buried there. He proves this by revealing that everybody in the churchyard has been similarly preserved. When he leaves, the town is looking at him like he just pissed in their punch bowl. I loved the notion of a holy man whose lot it is to go around and destroy other people's faith. What must that do to one's own faith? My meeting on the Disney Studios lot in Burbank that day was with Megan Walpert from Spyglass Films and Suzanne Patmore from Touchstone. It was scheduled for 1 hour, but it ran 3, a very good sign. They were fascinated with my Herbert Thurston first edition and how it connected with what they wanted from the show. It made the whole thing feel fated, which was, of course, my plan all along. By the end of the meeting, it was decided I would work with Megan to develop a 1-hour pilot based on the Miracles movie script. I hadn't been hired, mind you. That's not the way it works. I would spend countless hours developing and writing a pitch that I would deliver to the top executives at Touchstone and also eventually ABC. This would take a couple of months. Then, if and only if ABC liked it, would I be officially hired to write the script. Until then, I'd be working for free. If they didn't like it, we'd all shake hands and I'd go home without a penny to show for the work I'd done. This is how the television business works. As it turns out, back then in 2001, the Writers Guild did not go on strike, so I spent my days hanging out in coffee houses trying to somehow reduce and reshape the 2-hour movie script into a 1-hour TV pilot. The goal was to retain the emotion of the film, but in the final act, bring in a revelation that implies what Paul has been investigating is more sinister than he or the townspeople originally thought. This draws the attention of the Vatican, and Paul is quickly reassigned to a secret group within the Catholic Church that has been tracking supernatural events for over 1,000 years. And they now believe that generations of signs and symbols and mysterious happenings are pointing to a cataclysmic event that only they can stop, if they can figure it out in time. And guys, this was 2 years before the Da Vinci Code. Now, I had never written a television pilot. The process of television writing was new to me, but Megan at Spyglass became my guide, my muse, and my boogeyman, cajoling, encouraging, and ass-kicking me in equal measures. And it was exactly what I needed. Once we got the thumbs up from Tom Sherman at ABC, I figured I had at least 6 months to write a 1-hour script. My plan was to do what I always did when hired to write a movie: fuck around for about 4 months, spend my commencement money, and then when panic finally overtook me, go into a crazed shame spiral of fear and self-hatred and crap out a draft in 4 weeks. Hey, it had always worked before. Megan disabused me of that notion fast. Television is an actual job, with many regular steps and due dates. I was expected to write an outline that they would actually read. What the serious fuck was that about? Why not just come to my house and sit on the edge of my bed and bang 2 pots together every morning at 6 a.m.? Megan was a smart, gorgeous, funny, creative dynamo. But as the days went by, in my mind, she slowly morphed into the drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket. She would email me almost every day, checking on how things were going, and I gotta say, it started to drive me crazy. How are things going? How are things going? Let me tell you how things are going. Very, very poorly. It was now June 2001. My younger son Spencer had just turned 3, and my older son Owen was turning 5. But the tension and stress and obvious unhappiness of their mom and dad was growing. The idea that the marriage might not last was becoming a reality, to me at least, and it was scary. If we did break up, even if I thought it was for the best, it would still be the worst thing I could imagine, especially since my whole view of the marriage was based on me saving her. This would be failure on such a massive scale it was unthinkable. On the other hand, if saving her was a fucked up notion to begin with, maybe it was better to declare defeat, retreat, and try to figure out who I really was and what I really owed a partner. It wasn't something we could talk about. The pain and fear and anger and disappointment was so thick between us that to attack it head on would be like lighting a match while standing waist deep in a room filled with gasoline. Everyone was treading carefully, but I think we both sensed that something big and bad was about to hit us, and neither of us knew how to get out of its path, or exactly when the impact would come. So I worked on miracles every day. It was like starting an exercise routine. It was difficult and painful, but it grounded me. It gave me a way to get through my days. Small steps, small accomplishments. Here, Megan, I outlined Act 1. Praise me. Oh, please praise me, because if you come at me harsh, I will collapse in on myself like a paper cup. Did she know? She must have. Either way, I got nothing but kindness and encouragement from her. And steady pressure. When could she expect Act 2? Act 3? Suzanne Patmore at Touchstone said something about receiving a completed outline by the end of July. Did that sound okay with me? No. That did not sound okay. I could barely get out of bed in the morning. I was lucky to cobble together 2 hours of meaningful work a day. Usually it was way less. I was seeing my therapist 3 times a week at that point, and each of those visits was like a barely reachable oasis in a vast desert of weakness, fear, and mounting grief. But as the writing progressed, a sort of miracle happened. The same kind that always happens. The writing itself became the oasis. Those few hours a day, when I could sink into the story, were the only time in the day I wasn't in pain. Writing, when it goes well, is a very powerful narcotic. Filming had ended on the Mothman prophecies. One morning, I received a call from the Writers Guild. My writing credit was being challenged by the 2 writers Mark Pellington had worked with on set. These were guys he'd worked with before. It was a creative relationship with history, and it was how he was most comfortable working. I had no choice in the matter. The strange part was, they really hadn't changed the script. Some scenes in the very beginning of the movie had been changed a little, but nothing of the plot or theme or character relationships. They added some dialogue, including some lines that people still quote as their favorites, like when Alexander Leek assesses the supernatural visitors to Point Pleasant by remarking, quote, "Their motivations are not human." I hadn't been offended by any of the changes they'd made. They were respectful and minor, and they clearly understood what I was trying to do, so I was shocked and deeply threatened when they brought the script to the WGA for arbitration. According to WGA rules, a panel of 3 guild members would read all drafts with no names attached and then make a decision on who got credit. I can't express to you how terrifying this was to me. This movie meant everything to me. Everything in it, every character, every scene, every moment felt like a reflection of myself, my one true chance to put myself out there in the world and say, this is me. I felt like my very identity was being threatened. I was already in freefall in my marriage. Now this, it felt unsurvivable. Part of the Guild's process is to have each of the writers in the arbitration write a statement indicating what they think the credit should be and why. So, as if my life depended on it, I painstakingly went through my draft and their draft and built a case as best I could for why I should receive sole credit. This was agony because it required me to stand up for myself in a clear, articulate way at a time when I felt incapable of being assertive. But I had no choice. So I wrote my document and submitted it and then waited. I was told the process of deliberation could take months. As the end of July drew closer, I finally had to tell Megan that I wouldn't be done. And even worse, I was leaving town. We were going to Hawaii, a trip that had been booked months earlier and now seemed like a sick joke, a parody of a happy family vacation. But at least there'd be distractions, and could it really be any worse than staying at home? Of course it could. We tried. We really, truly did our best on that trip to be patient with each other and the kids. But it was surreal to be so sad and hurting and anxious and mad in a tropical paradise. Piña coladas don't have very much alcohol in them, and that was only the beginning of the bad news. On our second day, Megan emailed me in a panic. Touchstone was expecting the outline at the end of the week, and there was no way Spyglass was going to say no. I'd have to finish it in the next few days. Fine. In fact, the very next day, I ended up finishing it in one long 12-hour push, while my wife took the kids to the zoo and the aquarium and all the other places parents take small children to kill a day. And it was during those 12 hours that miracles died in front of me. Page by page, word by word, the colors faded, and the pace flagged, and the emotions dried up and floated away. It was fast hack work. I was just jamming events into place with no ability to make them come to life. They just sat there, inert. Every scene was a placeholder. But I finished it, and I sent it off way after closing time in Los Angeles. And then I spent the rest of the trip in scalding shame, waiting for Megan's phone call. But when our time in Hawaii was finally up, she hadn't called. Now fear replaced shame. I should call her and say something, make some excuse. But there was this small craven part of me that hoped somehow it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Maybe somehow she didn't hate it. Maybe I'd fooled them one more time. On the flight home, Owen got an earache and screamed for 4 straight hours. The hatred radiating toward me in waves from the other passengers felt good. It made sense. I deserved it. August 15th, 2001 was the day everything changed. My wife and I had lunch scheduled with my parents. They were dying to hear about Hawaii. And we actually did a really admirable job of making it sound like we had a wonderful time. Anyone who's been married will understand this. The ability to ignore a bad time, a bad mood, or even something truly awful, at least for a while. You can even have some really good times as the ship is going down. That lunch was one of the last. Later that afternoon, In fact, not even an hour after we were back from lunch, something lit a fuse, and from out of nowhere, we ramped up from tense words into a screaming fight. But before it really settled into one of our long, endless gutter squalls, she surprised me. "I think one of us needs to move out," she said. I was horrified. This was a crazy escalation. But she said it so quietly and calmly, I was completely thrown off balance. Then I realized she had just handed me what I'd been too chicken shit to demand for myself: a way out. After what felt like half my life, but which was only about 2 seconds, I said, "Okay." And then for the next 2 hours, we had a calm, constructive discussion about how it should work. I'd be the one moving out. But since this was about us getting distance from each other and not the kids, we decided to have the kids spend half their time with me. That would actually give us both breathing room, time with the boys and time alone. 1 week on, 1 week off. The turnover would be Fridays after daycare. Monday nights would be dinner with the opposite parent. We would basically co-parent from 2 different houses. There was a kind of relief that afternoon. Finally, we were both at least agreeing on things. It was nice to cooperate even when what we were cooperating on was the beginning of the end of our marriage. But we also agreed to start marriage counseling because we wanted a safe place to bring our issues, stuff we'd barely talked about without fighting. We would, in a sense, step out of the gasoline-filled room. We'd bring the scariest stuff out into the open and then see if it was solvable. I didn't think it was, but I wasn't sure. And I guess that's as good a description of hope as any. The feeling of relief only lasted a day. Then an overwhelming sense of failure swept over me, unlike anything I'd ever felt in my life. Massive, drowning failure. In whatever way I thought my relationship was about me saving my wife, I clearly had not saved her. Whatever thing inside me screamed that this was the most important thing to do in my life, I now knew I had not done and never would. Anger came in. It's her fault. She's unsavable. She's being purposely unsavable to destroy me. I felt rage, then depression, then fear, then rage again. Sometimes it took days to cycle from one to the next, sometimes minutes. I looked for a house to rent not too far away, somewhere with a bedroom for the boys and a backyard, somewhere that wouldn't make the situation feel even more scary and depressing, at least for them. I eventually found a nice place in the flats below Altadena and submitted an application. The landlord was a pediatrician, and when she met Owen and Spencer, it was a done deal. I made plans to move in the first week of October. But what happened with miracles? A miracle. My shitty outline turned out to be a non-issue. Before Megan even turned it into Touchstone, there was a new controversy that had to be dealt with. The director who had been attached, a guy named John Turtletub, who had directed National Treasure and Phenomenon, he was dropping out. I had no idea why, but it took a while for Touchstone to work through the fallout and reassess the status of the pilot, which in late August was very much in question. Megan told me not to worry. Until Touchstone got the turtle-top of it all settled, nothing was happening. I got a breather. The Tuesday after Labor Day, September 4th, 2001, I got a call from the Writers Guild. The arbitration committee had finally made their ruling. I would receive sole credit for the Mothman prophecies. The decision had been unanimous. I felt like my body, which had been racked with pain for months, was suddenly shot through with morphine. The next day, Lakeshore cut me a check for my sole credit bonus. It would be enough to get me through the next 6 months, which was about 5 more months into my future than I could even imagine. The Mothman prophecies was scheduled to come out in January. Would it be a hit? Would it be well received? What was going to happen with my pilot? What was going to happen with my marriage? All these questions hung in the air, their answers just out of reach. The check from Lakeshore arrived on the afternoon of Monday, September 10th. I opened it, then took it outside with me and sat on our patio with a gin and tonic and a plate of Ritz crackers and watched the sunset behind the tall pines across the street from what would soon be the house I used to live in. I sipped my drink and took a deep breath. For the first time in months, it felt like things just might turn out okay. You guys, my dream just came true. I get to do a live read ad for a product I actually use and love. I love Indian food. Okay, it's probably after like cheeseburgers, it's my second favorite of all foods. And I love meals that are healthy, fast, and simple to make. So I love the Cumin Club. Let me tell you what this is. These things, they come in packets. You order them, they deliver them right to your home. Here's the beauty. You just add water, you microwave. These things take less than 5 minutes. An Indian entree, ready to eat. It is so delicious. Okay, so let me tell you how I do it. I started off with the paneer tikka masala, which is not overly spicy. And it was perfect for me in terms of spice level. But then I did a second one. I had it with the dal chawal, which is sort of a buttery rice and lentil dish. And I mixed them together. That was my dinner. So the next day I did methi matar malai. I'm sure I'm pronouncing this wrong. My South Asian listeners, you're going to have to tell me how badly I'm mangling this. But anyway, the methi matar malai, it's sort of a sweet, nutty cashew gravy with peas. If you've had Indian food before, I'd say this is like a korma, and it's fantastic. So I did that one with something called pav bhaj. Pav bhaj. It's a spicy veggie stew. Again, not too spicy. You don't need to be afraid. And it was the perfect lunch. Took me 3 minutes. But they've got like 20 more entrees I haven't even tried yet. So I am working my way through. When I'm sitting here writing the podcast, I will suddenly be starving. And that is my danger zone, because that's when I will literally go into the kitchen and grab a bag of Doritos and just eat the whole thing. Don't do that. It's not good for you. It's not good for me. And that's why the Cumin Club is a lifesaver. Like I said, you add water, you put it in the microwave. 5 minutes later, you're eating it. It's a delicious Indian meal you can feel good about. Here's what you do. Click on the link in my show notes or simply go to thecuminclub.com and put in the offer code RHPB. That's going to get you 30% off. I'll say it again. Go to thecuminclub.com or click on the link in my show notes and enter the offer code RHPB, and you're going to get 30% off. Not on your first order, not on your first 2 orders. You're going to get 30% off every single time you order. They're going to deliver it right to your door. Eat something good, healthy, and delicious. You deserve it. You're going to feel good about it. The Cumin Club, authentic Indian flavors straight from the source to your door. God, I'm going to go have some right now. What am I doing here? Talking about it? I'm going to go eat it. It is Monday, October 8th, 2001, and it is quiet. I sit in my big leather recliner in the almost empty living room of the house I'm renting on Queensberry Road. I look out at the street through gauzy white curtains. Nothing moves. In the distance, I hear a high school marching band. It is the only sound, and it makes the relative silence all the more profound. I moved in on Saturday. There wasn't much to move. This chair, a bed, and 22 boxes of books. I sit in the silence and I can feel myself starting to unclench. This is the first time in my life I have ever lived on my own. No roommate, no girlfriend, no wife, no kids, no dogs. I am almost 35. The past month has been quiet if you don't turn on the television. It's the kind of quiet that follows a gunshot, a shocked waiting silence. Megan from Spyglass called me on September 13th to check on me. There have been a lot of these kinds of phone calls in the past month. Yes, I'm okay. No, I didn't know anyone in the towers. When we finally got around to miracles, she told me that Touchstone wanted to meet to discuss a reapproach to the material. Usually this sort of phrase would completely undo me, but my life and the whole world seemed to be in a mode of reapproach. At the meeting in mid-September, it was decided that the romantic tone of the story, left over from the feature film script, didn't reflect where we wanted to go with the series. And recent events regarding the Catholic Church that had been in the news, most of it about child molestation, had made the idea of centering our series on the secret inner workings of the Vatican unpalatable. Megan and I spent a few days designing a totally new pilot story that still maintained the structure of A. Paul Callan, a disillusioned young seminarian, investigates miracles for the church and discovers it's a bummer, and B. he investigates a new case that turns out to be totally legit, but also weirdly sinister. The case that makes up the bulk of the pilot would now be Paul's investigation of a terminally ill young boy who can heal people, but whose own condition worsens each time he does. Is this the work of God, the devil, or something else? In the new version of our story, Paul brings the evidence of this miracle to the Monsignor of his diocese, and is shocked to learn that the Monsignor doesn't plan to follow up. He's going to bury it. He's not interested in promoting the notion of miracles because he thinks it makes the church look foolish and primitive. Crestfallen and emotionally gut-punched, Paul quits. But then, in the final minutes of the pilot, he's approached by a mysterious man who appears to be aware of what Paul has gone through. He used to be with the church, but now he works more or less on his own, tracking supernatural phenomenon that he believes is happening more and more and points to the coming of a large event. Against his better judgment, but desperately in need of answers, Paul agrees to join him. Megan and I hadn't worked out all the details, but we had enough to go back to Touchstone, and we did. They loved it. And to be honest, so did I. The story had mystery, a surreal supernatural tone, and it involved real emotions against the backdrop of large philosophical questions. I was sent off to do an entirely new outline, and I had a feeling this one would not suffer the fate of the last one. And even though I now had to come up with an entirely new story, I didn't mind at all. This one would be all mine. I tore through almost all the boxes of books until I finally found it. Miracles by D. Scott Rogo. It had arrived in my life 6 months ago, and I had never read a word. So much had changed in those 6 months, in my life and in the world. It was a strange time to talk about miracles, but something told me it was finally time to find out what Rogo had to say on the subject. I made a cup of coffee, set myself up in the leather armchair, opened the book, and began to read. I woke up 2 hours later, my fingers still marking my place on page 1. This happened all the time now. I knew it had nothing to do with the book. It had to do with me and what was happening in my life. I was exhausted on a deep physical and emotional level. I could have slept for weeks. The last month with my wife, as I prepared to move, had been awful. In another one of the universe's great jokes, we had, months earlier, agreed to host a wedding at our house for a good friend in late September, and it was decided I wouldn't move out until after that happened. So the final weeks in the house were spent preparing for a wedding. Then a few days before the move, we sat Owen and Spencer down and explained to them what was about to happen. We tried to use the language we had learned from their daycare, an amazing, loving, supportive place that over the past 5 years had basically taught us how to be parents. We told the boys that Mom and Dad weren't getting along and were fighting a lot. You know, like you do with your friends sometimes, we said. So we had decided we both needed a timeout. Dad would be moving into a different house, but they would get to spend every other week there. They'd have their own room and a backyard and a TV and all the other things they had at Mom's house. In fact, at Dad's house, they'd even have bunk beds. We tried to make it sound like an adventure. The boys seemed skeptical, but we took our time and answered their questions. No, Dad's house wouldn't have dogs. Yes, they could call the other parent on the phone whenever they wanted to, and even go back and forth more frequently if that's what they wanted. We told them we didn't know how long our timeout was going to last, and we really didn't. We were still going to marriage counseling, and who knew how we'd feel once I moved out. I sat in my chair and listened to the marching band. I glanced at my cold cup of coffee and my miracles book in my lap. The quiet felt nurturing, soothing, like stepping out of a loud, hot factory into a cool evening breeze. No, I didn't know how long our timeout would last, and yet, already, I couldn't ever picture going back. Rogo's book examines classic orders of miracles through the methods and viewpoint of a modern parapsychologist, and I was gratified to find the first of many references to Herbert Thurston's The Physical Phenomenon of Mysticism on page 15. Rogo's approach in the book is to examine some famous cases of levitation, stigmata, bilocation, the hits, as well as bleeding statues, miraculous healings, and sightings of the BVM. That's Blessed Virgin Mary to you heathens out there. But he views these events from the stance of a parapsychologist, not a priest. The challenge of this sort of material, as I anticipated when the book first arrived, is the overwhelming religious bias involved in the vast majority of the cases. They are typically experienced by the holy, witnessed by believers, reported by church clerics, and described wholly in terms of the will of God. I found myself struggling to maintain interest in the cases and skimming through whole passages, when I suddenly realized that the disconnect I was experiencing was the solution to a very real problem I was having in my pilot. I had always more or less presumed that, on my show, the cases going forward would be built on the question, is it a miracle or is there a mundane real-world explanation? This worried me. It sounds good in a meeting to say, hey, you know what? Some episodes will turn out not to be miracles, and that'll be super cool. But in reality, it would not be cool at all. That's like saying, well, it's a cop show, but you know what? Some episodes, they won't solve the case, and that'll be super cool. Genre shows have rules just like law shows, doctor shows, and cop shows, and one of the rules is you have to give us the genre. In the case of a show like Miracles, people tune in to be mesmerized by the unreal. Don't harsh our buzz or we'll stop watching. So I knew that argument was bullshit. But if we weren't doing a sort of X-Files style believer versus skeptic, then what were we doing? Two believers? As a matter of fact, yes. Rogo's book made it clear. The exact same phenomenon can be investigated very differently depending on whether the investigator is a clergyman or a parapsychologist. One of the best examples of this is the case of the bleeding picture of Christ in the home of Abbé Vecher, a French cleric in the city of Mirabeau-en-Boitou. According to reports, not only was the picture bleeding, but so were consecrated hosts and a plaster statue of Christ erected in a nearby grotto. Everard Fielding, a British investigator for the SPR, decided to investigate. Over the course of 6 years, from 1914 to 1920, during repeated visits, Fielding found that while there was ample opportunity for fraud, it was unlikely. Early samples of the serum that seemed to spontaneously erupt from the picture and the hosts were tested and found not to be human blood, though later samples were. The phenomenon spread to other religious icons throughout the house. Finally, Fielding summed up his findings. What was happening in the Abbé's house was no miracle. It was a poltergeist. And the Abbé himself was the agent. He cited other cases from his investigations in which a poltergeist attack could be very narrow in scope and could correlate to the unconscious inner workings of the agent's psychology. One of the most compelling elements of his argument regarding Abbe Vacher was that the phenomenon seemed to follow him. On more than one occasion, when the Abbe visited other people's homes, their religious paraphernalia began to bleed. This traveling effect is common in poltergeist cases. This fascinated me, and it also gave me breathing room for constructing stories if the pilot was ever picked up to series. We could do all sorts of things: haunted houses, poltergeists, even UFOs. Rogo speculates that some famous Marian apparitions experienced by the devout could also be seen as nothing more than dazzling lights in the sky that, viewed in a non-religious context, might be identified as visitors from another planet or dimension. I loved the idea that I could have two different characters investigating legit phenomenon from two completely different philosophical points of view, and neither one had to be a skeptic. Once I finally got to work on the new outline, the story came together quickly. Each day I felt my confidence grow, and I also felt myself slip into a rhythm that was new to me. 2 writing sessions per day instead of 1. Now I would work from 10 a.m. to noon, then again from 2 to 4. This was only 1 hour more than my usual noon to 3. But something about it represented a change. I was on my own now. In fact, in the weeks when I didn't have my sons with me, I spent such long expanses of time alone with no human interaction whatsoever that for the first time in my life, I truly lost track of time. Hours lost to writing, reading, sleeping, or simply staring out a window. Nothing bad happened when I did this. No one got angry at me. The feeling that I was failing every day loosened its grip. It didn't go away entirely, but even a little relief was rapturous. For my birthday that year, on November 2nd, I traveled alone to Portland, Oregon. I ate dinner alone in loud, trendy restaurants with no companion but a book and a candle and a cocktail. And I was happy. In my hotel room at the Heathman on Broadway, I had the experience that other writers will recognize. Perfect flow, where writing becomes an unconscious act and the words arrive as dictation from a divine source. Page after page emerging with no seeming effort. This is true ecstasy. It is rare, but the few times it happens are worth all the days when writing feels like nothing more than kissing a corpse and hoping somehow it comes to life. By the time I got home on November 4th, 2001, the new outline was done. A side effect of all this was a new level of confidence and candor in marriage counseling. I started speaking all my feelings with no real concern about how they might affect my wife. Yes, I was finally being assertive, but I was also being a jerk. I wanted to start dating. I didn't want to wear my wedding ring anymore. I basically wanted to have the single life that I never had before. Obviously, this wasn't the main issue in our marriage, or even an issue. And I suppose if for me it was just about having sex, I would have gone out and had sex, but I didn't. But our marriage counselor had said that dating was usually considered on the table when people were separated. And once she did, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I realize now that this came as a painful shock to my wife, but at the time, I didn't care. I had gotten this far. I wanted to go further. And then, one day, in the counselor's office, my wife made her feelings clear. Dating was a deal breaker. If that's what I wanted to do, then it meant I didn't want to be married anymore. And if that was the case, I was going to have to say it. So once again, even as I thought I was being independent and brave and finally speaking up for myself, it was an ultimatum from her that pushed me to take the final step, a step I was too afraid to take until forced. So I said the words, "I want a divorce." It was a bad moment. My wife took off her wedding ring, threw it at me, and left the room. I was terrified, and I was furious. But mostly, I couldn't blame her. And I also couldn't shake the humiliating feeling that I wouldn't have said the words if she hadn't made me. Even in my moment of separation, I was pure, uncut chicken shit. I wrote what would be the second-to-last check to the counselor, stalled a few minutes so I wouldn't risk running into my wife in the parking lot, and then left. The script for Miracles was written from November 22nd to December 14th, 2001. Because the outline had been so detailed, the process of writing the script was basically about dialogue, timing the action within scenes, and overall flow. But the work was done against a backdrop of real fear. Because I had always operated on the notion that my job was to save my wife and that her survival depended on me, thus giving me a chance to save the mom who I couldn't save. And what is with all this saving? I was emotionally convinced that by finally leaving her, I was in some very real way abandoning her to death. I know this sounds melodramatic and self-aggrandizing, but it is absolutely what I felt, and the feeling was hard to shake. There were times growing up when my mother told me that if anything ever happened to me, she would die. I took this literally because I believed she meant it literally. She would either die of grief or kill herself. And now this feeling, perhaps unfairly, transferred to my wife. What if by leaving her, I'm killing her? My therapist knew exactly what I was going through, and she reminded me, your wife is not your mother, and neither one of them will die because of you. They're separate people who can control their own lives. Your decisions can have an impact, but ultimately, they control their lives, and you control your life. Don't forget that. I tried not to, but the human mind can literally change the physical world, at least according to D. Scott Rogo. In Miracles, he was pursuing what he called his parascientific approach, and it worked like this. Miracles really do happen, except they don't come from God. They come from us. Modern parapsychology, and we're talking mid-1930s to around mid-1990s, was truly focused on only two things, ESP and psychokinesis. This has to do with J.B. and Louisa Rhine's research and experiments at Duke University in the 30s, and a general rejection of ghost hunting as a serious way forward for a respectable guest at the dinner party of mainstream science. When Rogo wrote Miracles, he was attempting to explore miraculous phenomenon through this lens. He personally accepted the reality of psychokinesis, the rare ability of some humans to affect matter with the power of their mind. Sometimes the matter in question was their own body. Stigmata is defined as, quote, bodily marks, scars, or wounds corresponding to those of the crucified Jesus Christ. Some people in the grip of religious ecstasy do manifest these wounds and actually literally begin bleeding from the palms of their hands, the soles of their feet, and even their scalp, where the crown of thorns was placed on Christ's head. But outside the church, this syndrome is understood to be a psychological state in which the mind causes the body to produce the phenomenon. Now, that alone is pretty amazing, but it's more a testament to the capacity of the human mind than the specific interference of God. Parapsychologist and poltergeist expert William Roll had a theory that poltergeists were not ghosts or disembodied spirits, but rather the result of what he called RSPK, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. On some unconscious level, the poltergeist focus or agent would create psychokinetic effects that appeared as what we commonly know as poltergeist phenomenon. An energy we still do not understand, emanates from a human subject and causes objects to move about a room, or water to drip from the ceiling, or fires to start, or, in the case of Abi Vacher, paintings to bleed. With this in mind, and with our own personal experiences, it's not hard to see how certain stressful situations can induce a human body to a stomachache, or back pain, or in very extreme cases, bleeding wounds. The human mind can make the body do all kinds of crazy things that seem impossible. We've all heard stories of the mother who lifts the car off the child trapped underneath. We've all seen athletes do the impossible when the chips are down and everything rides on the next basket, touchdown, home run, or hole-in-one. What isn't possible if a person truly believes it is? In my personal world, I tried to keep watch over my thoughts. Yes, I wanted to believe I could control positive outcomes. I could produce a script that was my best work. But did that mean I could control other people's reaction to it? Of course not. And what about my wife and kids? How were my actions affecting them? I couldn't really be destroying their lives, could I? Could I avoid it, even if I wanted to? I spent my evenings on dating websites, still a new thing in 2001. Who were these people? Would they like me? Could I make them like me? Should I try? My landlord set me up with one of her other tenants, a woman who was also going through a divorce. I was so excited to be going out on a real date. I spent the whole time performing a version of myself that I was real pleased with, and then was surprised at the end of the night when she broke up with me. Basically, she said it was her, not me, but that we shouldn't have a second date, and that was that. I remember one woman who had been left by her boyfriend, a Marine. He was also the father of her 6-month-old baby. After chatting online with her for an entire evening, I felt an overwhelming desire to step into her life and be the better man and marry her and raise her child as my own. My therapist literally started laughing as I described these feelings. At first I was shocked, then hurt. Then I got it. It was Friday, December 14th. My script was due at Spyglass that night for a weekend read. I still had the last big scene to write. It was the majority of the 4th act. It was the scene where the mysterious man named Alva Keel, named of course after John Keel, approaches Paul and asks him to join his investigations. It was going to be a full day of work, and I wouldn't have any time for revisions. I got home from my workout that morning feeling anxious but excited. The script so far was great. I just had to nail this last scene. I walked into the house and saw the little red light on the answering machine blinking. I hit play, and within seconds felt like I was standing too close to an open furnace. It was a message from my wife, and she was very upset. I recognized the tone. I'd heard it in counseling many times. If it had just been grief, I could have handled it. I could have been sympathetic. It was the anger that undid me. She said we needed to talk. She said there were things she had to say to me. As a 35-year-old adult, 5 years into therapy, I wish I could say this was all something I could deal with, but it was not. I was terrified. And I was done talking. I had this irrational fear that she was going to make me come back, and I wouldn't have the courage or the strength to say no. Suddenly, I was 3 years old, facing an oncoming hurricane of rage from my mother. I looked out my front window and scanned the street for her car. Was she driving to my house right now? I panicked. I didn't shower or even change my clothes. I threw my computer into my bag, locked every door and window in the house, and drove away. I even drove away tricky, using side streets to get me to the freeway so there would be no way our cars would pass each other on the main streets. I was on the run. She knew all the places I liked to write. The coffee lounge at Vroman's on Colorado, the Starbucks on Foothill, the Starbucks on Lake, the other Starbucks on Lake. She obviously knew my car, a big red Ford Expedition. It would be a dead giveaway. Would she really try to hunt me down? Confront me in public? I didn't think so. But I was in uncharted territory. I couldn't be sure. And if she somehow did, it would send me over the edge. Work would be an impossibility, and right now, work was the only thing in my life going right and making me feel like a sane, capable human being. Sure, I was tricky driving away from an imaginary confrontation with my wife, but still. I had to hide. I needed to find a place where I could work undisturbed, a place where there was no chance she could ever find me. I drove all the way out to Glendora, about 20 miles east of Pasadena, and found a tiny cafe on a side street that I'd never been to before. It was 9 a.m. I was a sweaty, nervous wreck. But I had 8 straight hours to work. I didn't have a cell phone then, and public access to the internet was extremely limited unless you were in a cyber cafe. And if you don't know what that is, look it up. I found a table way in the back with a view of the door and access to a back exit. I plugged in my computer and started working, and I never looked up. Aside from a ham sandwich and about 6 cappuccinos that I really, really, really did not need and should not have had, I never looked away from the screen. And I believe now that when you watch that scene, even 22 years later, you feel every bit of unhinged fear that I felt writing it. Megan had very few notes, and the script went to Touchstone on Monday. We scheduled a notes call with them for Wednesday, which is why I was so surprised when Megan called on Tuesday just after lunch and asked if I could jump on the phone with the whole team, like right now. What could I say? 2 minutes later, I was on with Suzanne Patmore and her whole team, as well as Megan. Suzanne loved the script, like really loved it. But she had an idea that she wanted to pitch to me, a change in the Act 3 climax that she felt strongly about but wasn't sure I'd go for. I was immediately on guard, but I agreed to listen and give it serious thought, whatever it was. The climax of Act 3 and the whole episode takes place on a rainy night at a railroad crossing. Tommy, the young boy who can heal people, has been getting sicker and sicker with every healing. His dad thinks he should save whoever he can. He's going to die anyway, there's no question about it. So why not help as many people as he can before the end? The dad says it's Tommy's choice, but the mom is against it. What sort of a God would allow a little boy to heal anyone but himself? One night, she secretly bundles him up, puts him in the car, and drives away. But Paul, who's been staying at their house while investigating the case, sees this and follows in his own car. What happens next is truly horrifying. The mother's car goes out of control at the train crossing and is struck by the passing train. Paul pulls over and runs to the wrecked car to find Tommy's mom on the edge of death, but Tommy somehow uninjured. Paul and Tommy share a moment. It's clear what Tommy intends to do. The mother is too weak to stop him. Paul watches as Tommy reaches out and saves his mother's life, dying in the process. Paul knows he has witnessed a true miracle, and this is the story he brings back to the Monsignor at his church. Suzanne's idea was this. What if it's Paul's car that gets hit by the train? What if the boy dies saving Paul's life? I hated it. I didn't say that, of course. But I did mention my main problem with it, which was, if he saves Paul's life, then there's no question about the boy's abilities. Paul would be 100% convinced of the boy's supernatural powers. There would no longer be any question for our main character, no gray area of doubt. His journey would be over in the pilot. Where would he go in the series? Suzanne disagreed. Just because something supernatural happens to you, that doesn't make things clearer. The mystery is still there, maybe even more so. And of course, she was right. It was an argument I had made myself many times. Hell, it was the entire story of the Mothman prophecies. Anyway, I said I'd think about it, And we all hung up, and then Megan called me right back. She could tell I was bugged. You don't like it, do you? No, I said, I don't. It's too much. It's too big. Then she said, you really want to save the mom, don't you? But I was so upset and angry and freaked out by the touchstone phone call that I thought she said, you really want to save your mom, don't you? And my brain exploded. Is that what I was doing? The pilot I'd spent months working on was all about a little boy who wants to save people, and it ends with him saving his mother and dying in the process. You got to be fucking kidding me. How had I not seen it? Could I really be that blind to my own creative process? Well, yeah, I guess I could because I was. I said to Megan, hang on, as I tried to grapple with this realization. Okay, so what would it mean if I did it Suzanne's way? It would mean Tommy saves Paul. The boy saves the man. The child dies so the adult can move forward. Okay, I told Megan. Let me think about this. Can I call you tomorrow? We hung up and I got right to work. Not writing. I called my therapist. Could we meet tomorrow? The next day, I went through all of this in the small office that had become my personal church of transformation over the last 5 years. My therapist was as intrigued as I was. She made a point to reassure me, growth doesn't happen at the expense of the child. My inner child didn't have to die for me to move on. The trick was bringing the child along as a separate entity, one you could talk to and interact with in a sort of sympathetic time travel mode. I wanted to be able to calm that child like I would my own actual kids and reassure him that he wasn't dying, wasn't in mortal danger, and that while he had a shitty time being a scared, helpless kid, the adult version was there to help him and never abandon him. Like most of therapy, it made a kind of intellectual sense, and I could feel the idea slowly sinking in. It didn't solve my own inner terror, but it gave me insight. And it gave me insight into Paul Callan, too. Suddenly, his character felt fuller, and his journey had more dimension and meaning. The next day, I rewrote the third act. Now, Tommy saved Paul. The boy and the man were connected. Suzanne Patmore's instinct was 100% correct. I turned in the final draft of Miracles to the ABC network on Friday, December 21st, and promptly forgot about it. I had bigger worries. The Mothman Prophecies was going to be released in theaters on January 25th, 2002, just 1 month away. This was a major motion picture. This was way more important to my life and career than a TV pilot. This was the thing that had to work. Just imagine, if it does well, I might actually get a computer date after all. How would the world receive the Mothman Prophecies? Would ABC decide to shoot my pilot? What would my life be in 2002? I had absolutely no idea, but I knew that for some of these questions, I wouldn't have long to wait before finding out the answer. You know what? How about making 2026 the year that changes everything? A lot of you have reached out asking for help with your personal creative projects. So finally, after 30 years in the business, I'm making myself available really to whoever needs help. Maybe you're writing a TV pilot or a movie. Maybe you're trying your hand at memoir. You want to tell the story of your life, kind of like this podcast. Maybe it's a novel or a short story or a graphic novel. Look, whatever it is, they say endings are hard, but really getting started is even harder. And that's where I come in. Go to richardhatem.com and click on Richard Hatem's Writer's Room. I can help you with brainstorming sessions. Maybe you're halfway through something and you're stuck. I can read what you've got so far help you bring it to the finish line. Or I can read a finished script or a story and help you get it into professional shape so you can finally send it out into the world. Go to richardhatem.com, click on Richard Hatem's Writer's Room, and let's get to work. Mention that you heard about it on Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf, and you'll instantly get a 20% discount, okay? Working with me isn't free. It's not even cheap, but it's worth it. Don't wait any longer. Now's the time to make your dreams come true. Get unstuck at Richard Hatem's Writer's Room at richardhatem.com. D. Scott Rogo relates the following story in his book, Miracles, a Parascientific Inquiry into Wondrous Phenomena. In 1717, Sister Maria Villani, a Dominican nun at a small convent in Italy, experienced spontaneous levitation. She described it in a letter to her spiritual director like this, quote, "When I was in my cell, I was conscious of a new experience. I felt myself seized and ravished out of my senses so powerfully that I found myself lifted up completely by the very soles of my feet, but with a gentleness that was marvelous and most delightful. At first, I felt much fear, but afterwards, I remained in the greatest possible contentment and joy of spirit. Though I was quite beside myself, still, in spite of that, I knew that I was raised some distance above the earth." Two things happened to me on January 9th, 2002. I found out that ABC was going to shoot my Miracles pilot. And I had my first one-night stand. Hacha! It was also my last. If you came here looking for smut, you're way off, you damn perverts. Look, my sexual experience is deep, not wide. I've married half the people I've ever slept with. This particular woman's name was Rachel. She was cute and had a British accent. So did my therapist. Yeah, I know, but I'm 40% sure it was a coincidence. Was it a magical night filled with ecstasy? Well, sure for her. For me, I'm not sure. I remember I was pretty happy while it was happening. I think I was just glad it was happening. I mean, this was totally novel. It was the kind of experience that, when you're a weirdo, makes you feel like you're finally doing what normal people do all the time. The problem is, when you're a weirdo, normal things don't feel normal, they feel weird. And I was only partially there. Mostly I was sitting across the room, observing and trying to provide myself with emotional support. "You're doing fine, Rich. She has no idea you're basically a virgin. See, she's into it." Wait, I can't tell if she's having an orgasm or just yawning. But the next morning, I felt bad. What had I done? What did she expect of me? We'd had sex. Did that mean we were dating now? Did I need to check on her and see if she was okay? Did I need to marry her? Yes, I know this all sounds insane, but we've established I'm insane. But all these questions felt very real and important and immediate. I felt like this was something that had to be dealt with. And if I dealt with it wrong, I was a bad person. I was just messing up people's lives right and left. My therapist suggested I wait a few days before calling Rachel. "Listen, governor, a bird don't mind if a geezer doesn't call. Gore, it's 2002, innit?" She didn't really talk like that. I just like trotting out my flawless British accent every once in a while. Okay. At first, not calling her felt brave. But then, once I realized I didn't really like her and would be fine never seeing her again, not calling felt cowardly. But I never called. And she never called me. So I guess that answers my question about the yawning. Megan did call. She wanted to have a meeting to go over the pilot process, next steps, and what was coming up. Spyglass had never done a pilot either, so we were both stepping into a new world. When I got to her office later that week, the first thing we did was go over a list of potential directors. I didn't know most of the people she was talking about, but that didn't stop it from being by far the most exciting conversation I had ever had in my career. This was because it was a conversation, not just someone telling me something. My input was not only allowed, it was welcome. Hell, it was required. And it wasn't about the script. It was about making the thing. This was totally new and apparently totally normal. No wonder it felt so weird. This, I would learn, was the main difference between television and film. In films, once you're done writing the script, you're usually done for good. The director takes over, and if you're lucky, you'll get invited to a screening. That had been my experience with Mothman. In television, the director is not the boss, the writer is. When the script is done, you turn your hat around from writer to producer and get right to work, hiring department heads, going to casting sessions, scouting locations, covering the set, and then later, sitting with an editor, going over cuts. I didn't know any of this that day. I just knew I was so happy to be involved in the making of something I deeply cared about. Megan suddenly got a funny look on her face and said, "There's one more name on the list, but I'm happy to cross it out. I just thought I'd mention him because he has a deal with Touchstone. But we don't want you to work with anyone you're unhappy with." Who could it possibly be, I thought. I hadn't been in the business long enough to really hate anyone, or for anyone to hate me, unless it was Steven Seagal. "Who is it?" I asked. She said, "Matt Reeves." Matt Reeves? My best friend, Matt Reeves? My old partner at USC Film School? The guy I'd written Dark Territory with? Would I be okay with Matt directing my pilot? There was literally no other name that could have filled me with more joy. Not Spielberg, not Scorsese. But was he really available? Turns out he was. He was finishing up on Felicity. JJ had already left to do Alias. But Matt still owed ABC either a pilot script or a pilot directing gig. Doing my pilot would fulfill his contract. I asked Megan, "Why did you think I wouldn't want Matt?" She said that since we hadn't worked together since Dark Territory, she thought maybe we'd had a falling out. But the truth was, it was only a matter of circumstances that we hadn't teamed up again. He was focusing on directing and running Felicity, and I was busy ruining my marriage and going crazy. It was just bad timing. But the idea of Matt directing Miracles, I mean, he wasn't just my friend. He was an amazing director. In film school, he made my projects so much better than they had any right to be. I knew that however good the script for Miracles might be, Matt was going to elevate it through the roof in ways I could only begin to imagine. "If you can get Matt," I said, "I will be the happiest person in the world." "Oh, thank God," Megan said, "because he's our number one choice." Matt read the script over the weekend and was on board by Monday. I felt like helium had been pumped into my veins. I was fucking floating. The Mothman Prophecies opened on Friday, January 25th, 2002. I went to see it at the ArcLight in Sherman Oaks with a bunch of guy friends, all of whom gave me an unrelenting amount of shit the whole time. Not to keep me from getting a big head, but actually to get all the dark shit I was thinking out of my head by verbalizing things that were even worse. What was I worried about? Well, mostly box office. The reviews had already done their damage. Most critics didn't like it. Some hated it. Roger Ebert hated it. And the ones who did like it made sure to point out that it was Mark Pellington's direction that had salvaged my preposterous, dull, hokey, hacky screenplay. My only real revenge would be a box office smash for the weekend. That didn't happen. It opened in 6th place, beaten out by other new releases like A Walk to Remember and The Count of Monte Cristo. By Monday, it was clear. The movie was performing average at best. Whatever I had hoped for wasn't going to happen. People who were close to me, friends and family, were so supportive and happy for me, but I was unable to be happy for myself. I felt terrible, like a total failure, a public failure. And I remember wishing I could just go into a chemically induced coma and wake up 3 months later when all of this was over and forgotten. As I went to sleep that night, I could hear my mother's voice reminding me, never take something you care about to school. The divorce process was beginning. My wife and I were meeting with a mediator rather than squaring off with separate lawyers. It was a good idea, but it didn't change the fact that this was happening. And all the sick, angry, scared feelings that were held back for the last year were surging forward. There was nothing I could do about Mothman, and I felt equally helpless facing the divorce negotiations. I could try to get myself worked up about standing up for myself, but I knew that any financial help I tried to hold back from her was really only going to hurt my kids. So it was easier for me, and less scary and confrontational, to just give in. Even if it made me feel small and resentful. I guess by then I was used to it. Miracles is what saved me. It gave me something to do, something to focus on every day. Throughout most of February, the main job was casting. This involved me, Matt, and Megan watching actors come into a conference room on the Disney lot in Burbank and watch them read scenes from my script. Any writer who's ever been lucky enough to watch actors read lines that he or she has written knows what a thrill this is. For about 1 day. Then it becomes excruciating. Sometime around the 15th audition for any particular role, you begin questioning why you wrote the script at all, never mind writing it so poorly. When did the words become so flat and dull, and the scenes so trite and predictable? You try to remind yourself, it's only because I'm hearing it over and over. But there's something cruel and Twilight Zone-like about the whole process. It's like having your favorite food thrown at you by an angry chimp. And whatever thrill you got by finally standing in judgment of someone instead of being the one judged vanishes when you realize how ill-equipped you are to be judging anyone. The upside to all of this is when someone comes in and nails it. It's not necessarily skill or talent, although that plays a part. It's just that sometimes someone sort of is the character, and that's that. Our first experience with this was with an actress named Phyllis Lyons, who was reading for the role of Tommy's mother. On this particular day, it was just me and Matt in the audition. Whenever it was just us, it automatically felt like college again, like we were just two kids being handed the keys to a sports car we were afraid to drive. But we knew how to behave in front of the grown-ups. We politely greeted Phyllis when she came in and settled back as she started to read. And then, about a page into it, we started to laugh uncontrollably. This might be the absolute worst thing you can do during an audition that isn't a comedy. And the scene Phyllis was reading was definitely not comedy. Again, she was reading for the role of Olivia Ferguson, the mother of Tommy, the little boy who can heal people, but who gets sicker and sicker every time he does. In this scene, she's having an argument with her husband that grows more and more heated. Suddenly, she started shouting. And it was so real and so scary that Matt and I, having mother issues, had no other way to react. She stopped and looked at us, and we both immediately started apologizing like crazy. Was I doing something wrong, she asked. No, we told her. She was doing it too damn right. We told her she didn't have to keep going. We loved her, and we were so sorry to be such immature idiots. But it's hard to come back from something like that. And I don't think she really believed us until the next day when we cast her. And just like that first day, her performance in the pilot is brilliant. And Phyllis, if you're listening, I'm so sorry once again, and thank you for being so much more of a grown-up than me. Bit by bit and role by role, we filled in our cast. But the two main leads remained elusive, Paul Callan and Alva Keel. We'd read a lot of actors for the role of Paul. A lot. There were a few standouts. Scott Bairstow, who was finishing up long runs on Party of Five and Harsh Realm, was great. And Christian Camargo, who was recently a regular in the Apple Plus series C, gave an excellent performance. But Spyglass was a movie company, and after a while it became clear they wanted to cast a movie star. It was what they did. And ABC sure wasn't going to stop them. But who? The first name on their list was Skeet Ulrich. I knew who he was, and I liked him, but I couldn't necessarily see him playing the role of Paul any more than anyone else. When I watched an actor audition, I was really just listening to see whether they read the lines the way I heard them in my head. But one day, I noticed Matt watching an audition. He would slowly move his hand to his face and curl his fist into a little tunnel in front of his left eye. Later, I asked him what he was doing, and he told me he was trying to see the actor in a close-up. He wasn't really listening to their voice at all. He was trying to find something in their face, their eyes, something like a magnet that made them watchable. Matt was approaching this process in a completely different way than I was, and he'd done it before. I hadn't. I knew Matt was hugely talented. I'd known that since film school. But I was now beginning to realize that Matt was bringing a level of experience to this project that I simply did not have. In fact, over the next few months, I would have this feeling over and over with various people. I had created something that was now going to be brought to life by people who were vastly more experienced in their fields than I was in mine. This is a feeling I've carried with me throughout my career, even as over the years I've become the one with the most experience, in many cases. But more experience doesn't mean I know more about someone's job than they do. I learned early on to value the contributions of my fellow artists in producing television. And because I felt so supported, I never felt the need to be a possessive control freak or to stand over someone and micromanage them doing their job. Now, a lot of this is because, as neurotic as I am, I'm not a narcissist. I'm just not. I swear to God, my therapist said so. Depressed and anxious, sure. But even that's going away, thank God. I've always been able to enjoy working with other people, rather than see their contributions as some sort of a threat to my autonomy. And I can't imagine the gifts I would have missed if I didn't let people do their thing without the fear of me steamrolling them into delivering my vision, whatever the fuck that might be. I can't tell you the number of times I've looked back and realized how badly I would have fucked things up if I had insisted on my way and not trusted other people who knew better or simply had a vision that was different from mine. TV is a collaborative art form. If you're not comfortable collaborating, I urge you to take up poetry, or sculpture, or something else that can be done in complete isolation. But in television, you can't do it all by yourself. And you can't treat other people as nothing more than physical extensions of your own ego. I mean, you can. You can try. I've seen many try. But you'll never be satisfied with the results, and you will have made your coworkers miserable in the process. What's the point of that? Life's way too short. While Spyglass pursued Skeet Ulrich for the part of Paul Callan, a name came up for the role of Alva Keel that blew my mind. Donald Sutherland. It was unclear to me whether he had read the script, but at the time he was definitely interested in doing network television. This was obviously considered an essential get. If we got Donald Sutherland, our chances of having our pilot picked up increased dramatically. A phone call was scheduled for the next day. This all happened super fast. And the expectation was that I would somehow nab him, like it was up to me. I had no idea what I was supposed to say to him, and as it turned out, I barely got to speak to him at all. He was way more interested in talking to Matt, specifically about what kind of lenses Matt planned to use. Mr. Sutherland felt very strongly that certain lenses loved him while others didn't. Whatever Matt said reassured him. They spoke about cameras, compositions, and lighting for about 15 minutes, and then Donald had something else he had to go do, and that was it. We never heard from him again. Angus McFadgen was a somewhat late entry into the running for the role of Alva Keel. By then, I had gotten over my desire to cast somebody unexpected, someone with a real-world, blue-collar vibe, someone who you would never think believed in the supernatural. This was a holdover from my wish that somebody like Harvey Keitel would play Alexander Leek in the Mothman prophecies. Instead, they went with Alan Bates, who was brilliant. And here, too, Donald Sutherland notwithstanding, we were leaning toward Brits. There's just something about a British accent that says to Americans, this dude knows his way around a haunted house. I'm not saying I had it up to here with British accents at this moment in my life, but still. Angus seemed to know much better than me what the network wanted from him, and he delivered it in spades. They loved him instantly, and he shot to the top of the list. As he auditioned, I mirrored Matt. We both brought our hands up and did a little tunnel, and goddamn if Angus wasn't riveting in close-up. By the end of February, we had our two leads nailed down. Skeet happily and easily walked away with the role of Paul, and Angus did the same with Alva Keel. Next, we looked at the role of Father Bellamy. Now, this was Paul's mentor at the diocese, the man who basically raised him at St. Jerome's Orphanage in Boston, where Paul grew up. Diversity was not a big priority for networks in 2002, but they did feel that we could and should consider making the character, quote-unquote, Latin. Since, there's a lot of Catholics in Latin America, and the Mass was said in Latin, and you get the picture. I remember saying, hey, it'd be great to, get somebody like, someone like Hector Elizondo. And then Megan said, how about Hector Elizondo? And I kind of laughed and said, well, we're never going to actually get Hector Elizondo. And then a week later, we had Hector Elizondo. Dreams were coming true. Offhand comments were becoming physical realities. Miracles began to feel like more than the title of the show. It was a description of the whole damn process. I remember being on set one day watching Skeet do a particularly tense scene. It's where he comes into conflict with the Monsignor and eventually quits the church. I pulled Matt aside and said, this is a big scene. Paul is supposed to be furious. I mean, he actually quits the church. And I'm standing here 10 feet away from Skeet and I can't hear a word he's saying. Matt handed me a pair of headphones. No, Matt, you're missing my point. He should be screaming at this guy. Like Kolchak would scream at Vincenzo. Matt just smiled calmly and said not to worry. But I did worry. This just felt so underplayed. Like we were missing the whole emotion of the scene. A few weeks later, when I saw a cut of the whole episode, I was stunned at the power of Skeet's performance. Somehow, the quieter he got, the stronger he got. This was a huge lesson for me. Sometimes it feels like an actor is doing nothing, like literally nothing. But again, through a hand tunnel, they're doing a lot. There were so many moments like this when Matt calmly explained the process of filmmaking to me, because up until now, I'd only been allowed to participate in the first part, the writing. Now I was getting to do all of it. It was like USC Film School, only real. It had been 15 years since we suffered and struggled through our classes, Cinema 290, 310, and 480, hauling temperamental, antiquated equipment around town, shooting all night, freezing cold, hungry all the time, driving home tired, never enough time or film or people to help. And now, here we were with everything. Hundreds of people being paid to do their part in bringing this all to life. Most of all, we had made it. We were doing the thing we had dreamed about in film school, the thing that seemed so impossible and out of reach. And yet here we were, doing it together. In a season of real pain and loneliness and fear for me, here was proof that good things can still happen. And the fact that it was happening with my best friend, it filled my heart with gratitude. Maybe things were turning around. Maybe things were going to be okay. Maybe miracles don't only happen to the holy. From Miracles by D. Scott Rogo, quote, Secular examples of the miraculous are not unheard of. A case was reported from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on August 6, 1945, the day the United States dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima. Mr. Alan Demetrius excitedly told the local press that a bronze statue of a young Japanese maiden in his home had begun to cry. It was like she was weeping about the bombing. The tears were running down her face, he said. Several of Demetrius's neighbors also observed this bizarre episode. Everything came crashing down on Wednesday, May 8th, 2002. The pilot had been completed, and it was brilliant, a true work of art. In therapy that morning, I had no trouble praising it, and Matt and Skeet and Angus and everyone else. But still, it was excruciating for me to admit, to say out loud, how deeply and desperately I wanted this show to happen. It was, of course, entirely out of my hands. We'd spent a year working on it. It was turned in. There was nothing we could do now but wait. We had expected to hear something by Friday. This was the hardest time. This was the time I would typically go into self-preservation mode. Don't dwell on the outcome you want. Don't hope too hard. It will only make the disappointment worse when it doesn't happen. There was a tremendous, frightening amount of vulnerability attached to all of this. Somehow, this pilot had risen in my heart to the level of Mothman and beyond. Because I had been involved in every stage of its evolution. This felt more like a product born from my soul than anything I'd ever done. Admitting to myself and the world that I wanted this was like stripping naked in public and saying, please, somebody, be super into this. Anyway, I finally said it. I want this show to happen. I want people to see it, and I want them to see me. My therapist smiled and said, how about that? You took something you care about to school. After my session, I walked back to my car. My cell phone showed that I had received one voicemail message. I sat down and listened. It was my agent. He said that Michael Eisner, the head of ABC Disney, had walked out on the screening of my pilot after 10 minutes and announced, this show will never be on my network. I screamed. Then I called my lawyer. He confirmed what I'd heard. Michael Eisner and Bob Iger had hated the priest thing, and in any case, felt it was too dark. Miracles was dead. What does D. Scott Rogo have to say about miraculous healings? After all, that is what my pilot was ultimately about, a sick young boy who could cure anyone but himself. As it turns out, there are many stories of miraculous healings, many associated with the waters at Lourdes in France. And there's one story in the book Miracles that Rogo relates that feels particularly apt. In 1903, Marie Ferrand traveled by train to Lourdes seeking a miraculous cure. She was accompanied by her physician, Dr. Alexis Larac, and he had deep misgivings about the journey. Marie was dying. Of this, there was no doubt. Dr. Larac, in fact, would not have been surprised if she had died at any moment. Her young body was simultaneously emaciated and bloated with tubercular peritonitis. She was a mass of cancerous tumors and diseased tissue. She should not have been traveling anywhere. Both her parents had died of a similar cancer, and the hospital had given up any hope of treatment or cure. The trip to Lourdes was Marie's last hope, and even Dr. Larac realized it might be the only thing keeping her alive. When they finally arrived in Lourdes, Larac encountered a friend of his, a physician colleague who actually believed in the possibility of miraculous cures and claimed to have witnessed one himself. Larac found himself becoming enraged, and the two men argued. When his friend asked what for Larac would constitute a miracle cure, Larac said, I would have to see an organic disease cured, a leg growing back after amputation, a cancer disappearing, a congenital dislocation suddenly vanishing. If such things could be scientifically observed, they would mean the collapse of all the laws that we now accept, and then and there it would be permissible to admit to the intervention of a supernatural process. By the following day, Marie was even worse, and there was a debate as to whether she was even well enough to visit the pools at Lourdes at all. The Mother Superior of the hospital finally intervened. She said, "The girl has nothing to lose. It makes little difference whether she dies today or tomorrow. It would be cruel to deprive her of the supreme happiness of being taken to the grotto, though I fear she may never live to reach it." But reach it she did later that day, though she was too ill to be placed in the pool. So instead, handfuls of water were carried to her and sprinkled across her withered body. Within moments, the blanket covering her bloated abdomen seemed to be sinking. When Larocque investigated, he discovered that her body was returning to normal. Her heartbeats stabilized, and she began to speak. Soon she was sitting up and began to move around, and after a few days, her body was totally and inexplicably cured. Her sores, lumps, and pockets of fluid and tumors all vanished. There was no sign of tuberculosis or cancer. She had been brought back from the brink of death, and Larocque had seen the very miracle he had demanded the previous day. There is no Dr. Alexis Larocque. In fact, it's a simple pseudonym for the Nobel Prize-winning physician Alexis Carrel, which is Larocque spelled backwards. See, I'm not the only one who does it. And for the record, Marie Ferrand's real name is Marie Bailey. But the event happened, and it had a huge impact on the skeptical young doctor, and it affected the rest of his life and career. His work and research centered on pioneering techniques in blood transfusions and organ transplantation. And while he was always guided by the principles of science, his own experience forced him to accept the possible existence of the miraculous. In 1912, he won the Nobel Prize for Medicine, but his true goal in life was far more radical. Quote, "With what I have learned and with what I've experienced, I believe I shall succeed in establishing scientifically certain objective relationships between the spiritual and the natural, and thereby show the truth of the beneficence of Christianity." In other words, he knew something to be true, and he wanted to show it to the world. But his own health was rapidly deteriorating. He prayed, literally prayed for, quote, another 10 years to complete his work and realize his dream. But this was denied him, and he died without ever proving his central belief. The story of Marie Ferrand and Dr. Larocque was found among his personal papers 6 years after he died. I drove to the Disney lot and headed straight for the Spyglass offices in the animation building, trying not to crash, trying not to go to pieces. As I entered the building, Megan appeared at the end of the hall and started walking toward me. Thank God she was here. I choked up, fighting back tears. We met each other in the middle of the hallway, and I reached out for her when suddenly she grabbed me by my shirt and slammed me against the wall. "Oh, no, you don't," she said. "You get your shit together right now, mister. What you heard is a rumor. There has been no official decision yet. And until we're officially dead, we're still alive. Now snap out of it, because there's a lot of people who worked on this pilot who are going to be checking in with you and seeing what our status is. And you can't be staggering around the lot crying like a baby. Do you understand me?" She said all this fast, 4 inches from my face. Okay, I said, because in that moment, I was afraid of her. But I was also so grateful for her knowledge and confidence and strength. I desperately wanted to believe her. She'd never been wrong before. So I grabbed that small ember of hope and I held onto it with my entire soul. Then I started to get mad. I felt like Michael Eisner and beneath him, Bob Iger, were rejecting something that was undeniably great for fatuous reasons. This was back when I thought that pilots were selected on quality. Whichever ones came out best won. I didn't understand that there were other reasons, far more important reasons, at least as far as the network bigwigs were concerned, that certain pilots were picked over others. When the network people looked at pilots and decided which shows to order, they were making strategic decisions. Which of these shows will help us beef up our sagging Thursday night? Or fill that hole we have on Sunday at 9 p.m.? When we ordered these pilots 5 months ago, we didn't realize that now we'd need more female-driven shows, or more doctor shows, or fewer doctor shows. There were a lot of factors that existed far above my pay grade, and guys like Eisner and Iger knew all those factors and were experts at understanding what was needed and what would work on their network. Right? Well, not really. If they were, every network would only have hit shows. So even taking into account what their jobs were supposed to be, it didn't change the fact that those two assholes walked out on my pilot. And you know what? Not just my pilot. Matt's pilot, Skeet, and Angus's pilot. The pilot that hundreds of people poured their blood into. I was gutted and outraged. I was fucking furious. From Miracles by D. Scott Rogo. Quote, now we come to the third theme that has been emphasized in this book. If we accept that an individual human mind can indeed produce miracles, then the psychic capabilities of a whole group of minds acting in consort must be immense. Miracles may potentially occur when large groups of people who share a similar worldview come together. Their combined faith and emotion may somehow become psychokinetically linked to the world around them. Miracles may be the result. The cast and crew screening was held on Thursday night, and it felt like a funeral, a rally, an Irish wake, and a birthday party all rolled into one. I spoke, Matt spoke, Skeet said a few words. There was so much joy and hope in the room. There were only a few of us who knew how close to death we really were. Just after the screening, Megan told me that she had heard that Steve McPherson, the head of Touchstone, had ordered 25 tapes of the pilot with the title taken off. This news was delivered to me like it was top secret. But all it really meant was that the studio was doing testing, and those test scores would be factored into any final decision that got made. Copies of the pilot were also being sent to ABC Publicity and Advertising. Megan explained the importance of this. If this department liked the show, and more important, thought they could sell the show, this could outweigh the personal taste of Michael Eisner and Bob Iger. So, there was still a chance. I went to sleep with a sliver of hope still living in my heart. On Friday, the news got even better. Testing went great, and publicity and advertising were salivating at the prospect of selling a show that was about, quote, the ultimate battle of good and evil. That wasn't exactly what the show was about, but hey, if that's what gets it on the air, I didn't care if they sold it as a romantic comedy between Skeet Ulrich and Satan. Which isn't a bad idea. The news came, as it often does, while I was at McDonald's. It was Saturday afternoon, May 11th at 4:30. It was Tom Sherman, our network executive. And it was his unenviable job to make all the calls that informed the pilot producers of their fate. I knew that once I flipped open my Nokia, it would only be a matter of seconds before I knew my fate. So I sat down at a table near the play area and let my eyes drift over to my kids, Owen and Spencer, as they went nuts on each other in the ball pit. That's my life. Right there, I thought. It doesn't matter what happens right now because the really important factors in my life are currently hurling disgusting saliva-covered plastic balls at each other and having the time of their lives. I flipped open my phone. "You sitting down?" Tom asked. Fuck. Yeah, I'm sitting down. "Well, stand up. You're a showrunner now." What? Miracles has been picked up for 13 episodes. Now you're mid-season, we're looking at a January premiere, and there's a lot to talk about in terms of tone and casting the woman who's going to work with the two guys, but that's for later. You fly to New York Monday for upfronts. I'll see you there. A few minutes later, I hung up. You're a showrunner now. I knew that wasn't exactly true. We'd spent a couple of weeks interviewing experienced TV showrunners, knowing I'd be teamed with someone who knew how to keep all the trains running on time. But still, it didn't matter. I had my answer, and it was the answer I had prayed for. A show that I had created was going to be on network television. It had taken a year to make one episode. In the next 9 months, we'd have to make 12 more. Was that even possible? My friends, at that moment, as I sat in that McDonald's, my heart and soul rising up and floating somewhere over that ball pit where my children played, absolutely anything was possible. Thank you for joining me on Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf. Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf is presented by Astonishing Legends, 134 West, and Summerland Entertainment. Executive producers Scott Philbrook, Forrest Burgess, and Susan Lambert. Our associate producers are Tess Feifel, Sailor Franklin, and Harrison Marks. Our sound designer, editor, and engineer is Kevin Ducey. Artwork is by Tommy Beaver. Our website is by Kayla Lord. And our music, as always, is by Nima Kazaruni. Until next time, be safe and be well, find the light in the dark, and we'll see you again soon.